Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Hey, Ronald, looking sharp.
Hey guys.
Hi, Hannah. I'm Mike Littleton. It's Ronald Wallace. We're both from Williamsburg.
Nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet y'all.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Ronald. It's good to officially meet you. And it's not over email.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes. Thank you.
Hi, Hannah.
Hey, David.
How's Sage?
Oh, Sage, as you know, in costume every day for the last week, just going around the world as Owlette. So doing what they do.
It's Halloween month. Right?
Oh no, this is gonna be a thing. I think this is not a limited edition version of the kid. Everyone for joining us so far. If by any chance when you are not speaking, if you could mute your mics, that would be great. We will begin at 1:50 on the dot. Thank you.
Awesome. And so should we leave and then we just pop back in when it's time for our session? Because I think we're the third group. We just stay here? All right, sounds good.
Hey there, Dr. Naff.
How are you, Shenita?
Good.
How'd your other session go?
It went good, minus the technical issues that I had. But Jenna helped me, so it worked out great. It was good. It was a good session overall, though.
That was on literature related to your dissertation, right?
Yes.
Cool. It was such a good literature review.
Thank you.
Will your fourth speaker also be present for your session, Dr. Naff?
Yeah, I think Matt should be. He emailed me earlier, so I know he should be hopping in here in a little bit. Matt's great. Yeah, he'll share with us what his work is like with the elementary level.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking about Melissa Yeung.
No, Melissa won't. No, Melissa had some other engagements going on, so Melissa won't be here today. But she deserves credit for her hard work on this research.
Okay, everyone, it is 1:50, and so we will begin. I'm very excited to be the chair for the session. I'm Hannah Science at James Madison University, and I will be the moderator. Each session or each presentation will be about 15 minutes, and I will give you a 5-minute warning in the chat. Everyone, for those who are participating, please, if you could wait for your questions till the end, then we will have a 15 to 20 minute question and answer session at the end of this after all the speakers. Additionally, if you have questions as they're speaking, you could put it in the Q&A chat up at the top. And if it's a question that needs to be addressed by everyone, or that, at the end, I will read it out for everyone, and maybe some of the speakers, if they have a chance and can check it and it seems like a question they could quickly answer, they can always respond to you directly as well. Okay, so first I would like to introduce Naff, Shenita Williams, and Jenna Darby. Dr. Naff is the Associate Director of the Metropolitan Educational Research Consortium and an Assistant Professor of Foundations of Education at Virginia Commonwealth University. And prior to coming to VCU, he was a high school counselor. Shenita Williams is a PhD candidate in the Education Leadership, Policy, and Justice program at VCU School of Ed. Shenita is also affiliated with Henrico County Public Schools and is a licensed clinical social worker and a school social worker. And Jenna Darby is a research and evaluation specialist with Chesterfield County Public Schools. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
All right. Thanks, Hannah. I'm going to share my screen so I can share this presentation. And we have a lot to cover and not a ton of time to do it, so I'm going to go pretty quickly. But just really quick, could everybody see my screen?
Yes.
All right, good deal. Thank you. So really quick, just want to thank Shenita, Jenna, and Melissa, who's not with us today. She's has another engagement, but just for your tremendous work on this very, very large writing project. We're eager to see this in print very soon, but really happy to share what we've learned so far. So we've conducted a systematic literature review exploring the mental health impacts of COVID-19 on PK-12 students using just empirical research. So just really quickly what our process was for a systematic review. These are our search terms. So just to give you an idea about how thorough we were to make sure that we're capturing everything. We used prominent databases and pulled together what ended up being over 1,000 sources that we were considering in our search. And from those 1,000 sources, we screened all the articles by title and abstract, and we excluded based off of various criteria. If it wasn't related to mental health, not related to COVID-19, no PK-12 student focus, not empirical, or if it wasn't written in English. Eliminated 900 of the articles that way and ended up with 188. And then our team looked at the full text for 188 articles and screened those, excluded more based off of those criteria. We also had a quality appraisal instrument to eliminate an additional 75 studies. And so what we're going to talk about today are the results of 113 studies being analyzed that were scrupulously tested to make sure that they met very strict criteria. For these are studies that are specifically about empirical evidence of the mental health impacts of COVID-19 on PK-12 students. Just to give you an idea about the location of the research, this is international. Much of it was the United States, but a lot of it in Europe and China as well. Research methods were overwhelmingly surveys or questionnaires because a lot of this was rapid research where they're just sending out quick questionnaires to people. And the mental health focus was primarily related to anxiety and depression as well as stress. Many of the studies had more than one areas of mental health focus, but just to give you an idea about sort of what the landscape of this is. And from these 113 empirical articles, when we reviewed them and read them, we came up with, we found 5 themes that emerged from the literature that we're going to talk to you about today. Theme 1, I'm going to give you a quick overview of, and that's the broadly disruptive nature of COVID-19 for PK-12 students. So there's many ways that this pandemic was disruptive for our students. Students experienced a severe disruption to routine, not just in school, but also in their personal lives. This disruption to routine tended to be more pronounced and impactful for young children, some research found. Also, there was obvious disruption to schooling as schools shut down for social distancing to mitigate the spread of COVID. And what studies asked parents to rank what their actual concerns were related to COVID-19 over and over again, parents would indicate that disruption to schooling was their primary concern. Students also reported stress from online learning challenges and, of course, social isolation due to social distancing and quarantine measures. As we'll talk about a little bit later on, this is most pronounced for adolescents. And social isolation was associated with increased depression in students. There was also physical health issues associated with the disruptions to daily life caused by COVID-19. That includes disruptions to diet and exercise, and there's some recommendations that we'll share related to that. There was also very clear and compelling evidence that there was sleep disruption related to the pandemic for students and their parents. And sleep disruption was associated with increased stress and depression in many of the studies that we found. Additionally, in terms of disruption, we found that because our world has moved online, hence we're having an online MERC conference again this year, studies showed over and over again an increase in internet use, device use, and social media use. And for internet and device usage, it was included, studies found that this reached the point of addiction often in youth, but also that these were associated with stress, anxiety, and depression whenever we had increased use of internet devices and social media, with one exception with relation to social media use. Caberhe and colleagues, which is a Belgian study, they did a survey of 2,000 Belgian adolescents. Those with higher anxiety levels were more likely to report increased social media use. The purpose of it, they said, was to maintain peer connection, but social media use actually mediated the negative impacts of anxiety on overall happiness. So increased social media use wasn't an exclusively negative thing. Theme 2, Shenita will discuss.
All right, so theme 2, we looked at connections between the caregiver and PK-12 students. And what we saw was that caregivers who experienced a lack of financial support, changes in childcare, and a decrease in social supports, they were more likely to experience a worsening in their mental health, creating or exacerbating psychological stressors for both caregivers and children. The financial stress experienced by caregivers led to low responses in meeting the social emotional needs of children. High levels of stress, anxiety, and depression was found among caregivers of children with special needs. These parents also reported feeling defeated at times. In 2 similar studies, the stress, anxiety, and depression of caregivers was found to be significantly higher during lockdown in comparison to the period of time prior to or before lockdown took effect. Looking at the caregiver connection with children, the increase in interaction between caregivers and children due to lockdown measures led to perceived increases in family conflict, and this conflict was related to more depressive symptoms and feelings of loneliness. However, some families experienced strengthened relationships because of the opportunity for increased family time and relationship building. The children with a mentally ill caregiver, they experienced more negative emotions, higher levels of disturbed attachment, and difficulties in emotional regulation. Greater child anxiety was associated with greater parent anxiety. Children's stress levels were impacted by caregivers who had challenges regulating their own emotions. An example of caregiver and student mental health, this connection is demonstrated in a study of 414 Canadian parents. Researchers found that parents who reported high levels of stress also reported being less responsive to the cognitive and affective needs of their children, particularly adolescents. Parents with a high school diploma or less also reported less likelihood of being able to meet the basic needs of their children compared to parents with a college degree or higher. Jenna?
So we will not fully understand the impact of COVID-19 for some time, but the studies we analyzed did look at the real-time impact of the PK-12 student mental health. COVID-19 has affected the mental health of our students in ways including anxiety, depression, manifestations of loneliness, and the fear of COVID-19, and then the resulting behavioral issues that came with those. A widespread change in mental health was demonstrated in these studies through pre and post surveys if they had already had a study going on that would be affected by COVID-19, one-time surveys or interviews with parents and caregivers, and then finally emergency room data. So first, the fear of COVID-19. This was a mental health challenge for both children and adolescents throughout the studies. Students feared that contracting COVID-19 would be extremely or very serious. And then interestingly, 1 or 2 studies that we looked at found that the level of fear about COVID-19 could actually have a practical benefit because it resulted in behavioral changes such as wearing masks, washing hands, and avoiding public crowds. Some reports also saw that children were worried about economic-related concerns to COVID-19. Anxiety, both these studies on this slide demonstrate the high anxiety levels reported throughout the studies, ranging from 40 to 60% of students who had high anxiety levels. The studies consistently reported that higher anxiety levels and symptoms in adolescents were higher than those in children, and that many PK-12 students were reporting feeling anxious during the pandemic. The rates of depression were widely also reported throughout the reviewed studies. Normed cutoff scores for clinical depression symptoms showed that in numerous studies of students, between 14 and 33% of the samples were reporting symptoms above the threshold for clinical depression. So while causality is difficult to ascertain, many studies provided correlations that gave us some insights into the increased depression rates. Things that were correlated included family dynamics, schooling changes and social connections, living environment changes, and a few others. It comes as no surprise that during the social distancing and elimination of gatherings used to stop the spread of COVID-19, between 60 and 90% of parents reported that their children missed their friends. However, students also reported that they missed contact with caring adults like grandparents and their teachers at school. One study found that loneliness was inversely associated with happiness and that social isolation was associated with stress, decreased mental health, and was higher for students who had previous psychiatric diagnoses. In fact, another study found that loneliness was the most salient predictor of all psychiatric outcomes. It was associated with morbidity, and mortality for adolescents.
All right. The fourth theme identified that emerged with students whose mental health has been particularly impacted by the pandemic. So we found that certain student identities compounded the issues experienced by children and adolescents during COVID-19. When we took a look at age, for example, preschoolers, they missed the routine and structure provided by early childhood settings. We found that elementary age students, they were reporting higher incidence of feeling nervous and anxious, depressed and hopeless. They also had, just given the nature of them developmentally, they had up to 80% of them had understandings of COVID-19, but they still had a great deal of misinformation around COVID-19 as well. Most stressful to our older adolescents, our high schoolers, was the decreased emotional connection and support with peers because they weren't able to spend time with friends. With respect to gender, on average, girls reported more symptoms of anxiety and depression, also stress, than compared to boys. Male students were most concerned with academics, their work habits, and the future. And non-binary students reported the most challenges with mental and physical health and challenges with social connection. When we took a look at race and ethnicity, we found that Black and Latinx families experienced disproportionately higher rates of COVID-19 stressor exposure. And then a study by Gazmarian and colleagues with two student groups, both racially and economically diverse, high schools in Georgia, Black and Latinx students were significantly more likely to be worried about the pandemic and or getting sick. Turning our attention to socioeconomic differences, children with low or medium socioeconomic status, and students residing in less developed areas were at greater risk of psychological stress. Students from less wealthy households and no internet access experienced greater levels of stress in comparison to more affluent households. We also saw that youth with pre-existing mental health, they were at greater risk for depression, anxiety, PTSD, and suicide as a result of the fears of COVID-19. Children with neurodevelopmental disorders, such as autism and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they were in need of more support than students without these same challenges. Adolescents with a history of trauma, particularly around scarcity and access to resources, dealt with compounding issues, and higher levels of trauma was also associated with obsessive compulsive disorders. With substance abuse, in a survey of over 1,000 Canadian adolescents, what was revealed is that the number of teens using and abusing substances did not increase. But what did increase was the frequency at which teens were using, namely alcohol and marijuana. And adolescents who had higher fears of COVID-19 and depressive symptoms, those were the students who were more likely to use alone. And then with abuse, what we saw was that students were really enduring more physical punishment and increased conflict with parents than they had pre-pandemic.
So we looked at mental health through the lens of resilience and coping in this last theme. First, we'll look at the negative coping. Students were disengaged from people and school activities and then often used negative coping mechanisms such as overeating, substance abuse. They had higher rates of stress and depression. However, not all students use these negative coping mechanisms. Coping was also found to have a protective factor that enhanced mental health by promoting an individual's sense of control over a chaotic environment, creating opportunities for satisfying relationships and a support network. So you can see all of these things that students were using in the studies: humor, social connection, social media use in a positive way, and then becoming more resilient. Positive mental health outcomes from the pandemic. As you can see, when they were using these positive coping mechanisms, it protected them from depression and anxiety. And so really encouragingly, some literature was showing that students were benefiting from time at home with their parents. Students, especially those from gender diverse backgrounds, were experiencing some relief from the stress of school. And then some students were even found to enjoy the less stressful online environment. We looked at some studies that obviously we can't look at causality because these weren't intervention studies, but we did find a lot of positive mental health outcomes from the pandemic. And so some of these things were promoting positive mental health, which I think was really encouraging.
And Jenna, do you want to talk through these?
I can. I was trying to skip ahead to save time because I know we're at the end of our time and I wanted you to have time to talk.
So very quickly, considering everything that we just talked about from the research, what are our recommendations for supporting mental health in schools? Keep in mind that the majority of mental health support occurs in schools. I think for Shenita's dissertation and her literature review, there's a study that found that students are 21 times more likely to get mental health support in schools than they are from community providers. This will be an urgent need. We need to train educators broadly in brief mental health interventions because our school-based mental health providers are going to be overloaded. That's counselors, school social workers, and psychologists. Need to pay attention to the mental health of parents as well and caregivers when we're supporting students because there's a very clear connection in the literature. Need to consider additional screening for mental health challenges while keeping in mind that if you do any sort of like universal screening for mental health, then you also need to make sure that schools are able to actually meet those needs depending on what level of stress, anxiety, and depression students report. Important to help youth to maintain their social networks as much as possible, even while they're engaging remotely. And mental health supports in schools has to be prioritized in policy and sufficiently resourced. We're going to need an all hands on deck approach moving forward in schools. I'll share really quickly a quick plug. We have a MERC seminar on this where we're going to do a deeper dive on Tuesday, November 16th from 4:30 to 5:30 over Zoom. And we'll share more information through our stakeholder listserv very soon, where we'll also pull in some perspectives from our school divisions on this. And this is our contact information. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. That was such a great and informative session. I'm looking forward to joining your Zoom later. Next, we have Matt Shanker, who will be presenting on making mindfulness accessible in preschool and elementary classrooms. Matt is a mindfulness-based counselor who works for ThriveWorks Counseling and his own consulting company, The Mindfulness Counselor. He has worked as an elementary school counselor, PBIS coach, mindfulness teacher, private practice counselor, and early childhood mental health consultant. Matt lives for helping people live empowered and meaningful lives by helping organizations build mindfulness-based and values-driven systems. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm still just sort of taking a moment to digest all of that really powerful research that last group presented. Thank you so much for that. A lot of heavy information as we look at the pain that our students are facing, that our education systems are being challenged to address right now. In this session, my hope is to explore a little bit more of the science through story. My hope is that you'll leave this session with a greater understanding of what a process might look like for transforming a school's culture, transforming a school's systems to more deeply meet the human needs of our students and our staff. And I'm going to do that by walking you through a story of a process I've led. So as mentioned in the introduction, I'm a mindfulness-based counselor, and I'm a mindfulness-based and values-driven culture consultant. What that means is I spend most of my time working with individuals, adults suffering with trauma, anxiety, depression, parents who have children with challenging behaviors, children with trauma, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, anxiety. And then I travel across the country and work with schools, preschools, summer camps, and after school care providers on creating mindfulness-based and values-driven systems. And if that term still seems somewhat odd to you, we're going to get into that. So when I think about the needs of our students, the quote that I always return back to is this one in the top left. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. The sad truth is I grew up as a kid with ADHD who experienced immense trauma. And I grew up feeling as though I was the flower that wasn't growing the way he was supposed to, and that everyone blamed me and shamed me for not doing so. I had parents who were upper middle class, and both of which had more child development training than most parents get. And I grew up in an area in Texas where I attended the absolute best elementary schools that the state had to offer. And yet, I experienced immense trauma. I experienced sexual trauma. I still hold the record for most suspensions ever given out to a student in that elementary school. I have visceral memories of being 6, 7 years old and tearing apart a classroom because I felt chaos on the inside, and so I wanted my outside world to match. I didn't know how to feel my pain, and so I caused pain. I couldn't connect with myself, so I couldn't connect with others. And so I would tear apart a classroom, and then I would hide at the back of the classroom under a desk and scream at anyone who would come and check on me, while at the same time desperately hoping that they wouldn't go anywhere. I spent my teenage years still metaphorically hiding under the table, suppressing my emotional experience, creating a persona that I thought I had to create in order to fit in, to have some sort of semblance of connection. However, perpetuating that persona deepened my shame and loneliness because I was continuing to abandon myself, deepening the belief that if people found out who I really was, that they wouldn't accept me, that I wouldn't belong. Shame, loneliness, isolation. It led me to addiction, to suppress further the pain that I carried from the trauma that I experienced through my childhood. And since I didn't have any other skills for relating with my emotions differently, I sought out different intricate ways to suppress until eventually I hit a wall. Well, literally, I hit a tree. I was in the passenger seat of a car with a friend as he drove right into a tree while I was high on opiates. And that next morning, I got out of the car and I walked home. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and at 18 years old, I decided I was going to stop running from my internal experience. That's when I began to learn about mindfulness. And I spent the next decade of my life exploring this question, which is it possible for us to create systems that allow all children to feel like they belong no matter what their skills are with emotional regulation? Is it possible for us to create systems that actually help to teach children these skills? And now I work with families, schools, preschools, summer camps, after school care providers on how do you create systems that promote these skills? Mindfulness skills. Many of us, when we think about mindfulness, we think about the state of mindfulness and cultivating such through mindfulness meditation. Meditation is structured attention practice. Mindfulness does not necessarily need to be practiced through meditation. Mindfulness is paying attention to the present moment in a particular way. What is that particular way? On purpose and non-judgmentally. The fact of the matter is we live in a society that perpetuates and promotes different modes of mind than mindfulness. We are consumed with problem solving, planning, ruminating, predicting, judging. We wake up in the morning and many people's first thought is, oh, I didn't get enough sleep. Oh, I have so much to get done today. I don't have enough time to get all of that done. And then they think about all the problems that they have to face, and they create plans, and they predict, and they evaluate, and they ruminate on mistakes that they've made. Judgment. And we stay in these cycles, which perpetuate anxiety. And you know what they do is they keep us attached to our cognitive and rational mind, thus not strengthening our connection with our somatic experience, what we are feeling. Instead of connecting with what we are feeling, we practice staying connected with our thoughts, and those thoughts are about the future or they are about the past. Well, what we practice grows stronger. Now, mindfulness is a state that anyone can practice and cultivate. It is a quality of awareness that is rooted in the present moment. And it is a personality trait that can be promoted or undermined based on the systems in which an individual exists. This circle here is the process of mindfulness. One sets an intention rooted in the present moment. A distraction inevitably comes up because that's what our minds do. We spent 95% of our time as Homo sapiens sapiens living as hunter-gatherer nomads in groups of about 100 to 150 people, and so our brains evolved for that type of lifestyle. Our brains evolved to help us survive. They want to ruminate about mistakes that we make that might result in exclusion from the tribe that we need to survive. Our mind wants to plan for potential threats that might be coming our way. Distractions are going to come up, particularly when we are living in this modern world that is surrounded by infinite potential stimuli, where we feel this pressure to continually engage with our world with a continuous partial attention. Well, when I'm practicing mindfulness, I set an intention in the present moment. That distraction comes up, and eventually I need to notice that I've become distracted. My attention is on something other than what I intended. I then release and I return to my intention. There's a lot of words on this slide. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that these are statistics of the state of our children and educators' mental health before the COVID pandemic. We had a crisis of mental health on our hands before the events of the last 20 months. The events of the last 20 months, the tragedies that we have faced, and the impacts on our systems has exacerbated the challenges that already existed. Depression had already become the leading cause of disability worldwide. US life expectancy had already begun declining, not only because of rates of physical health, with heart disease on the rise and obesity on the rise, but also because the numbers of deaths of despair from suicide, drugs, and alcohol abuse were especially on the rise. And rates of loneliness were already reaching epidemic levels, to the point where the 19th Surgeon General of the United States, when he left office, said he was going to focus the rest of his life on studying the greatest public health crisis facing the country. And he wasn't talking about obesity, cigarettes, or a virus. He was talking about the epidemic of loneliness. In the 1980s, a group of researchers sent out a survey to folks and asked them, in the last 6 months, how many people have you talked to about close personal matters? The average answer was 3. By 2006, the average answer was 0. Technology has advanced in our society at such a rapid rate that we have not adapted in social groups in the ways that we need to in order for our human needs to still be met. Our connection needs are not being met. Our students' connection needs are not being met, and they were not being met before the COVID pandemic came along. That's important for us to understand contextually when we're having conversations about how we shift our current systems to more truly meet the psychological needs of our students. Because it's not only about understanding the challenges that they currently face, it's also about understanding where those challenges came from. And they did not just come from challenges that have happened, from situations that have occurred in the last 18 months. They came from systems that were not meeting their needs before that either. I noticed this when I was first hired as an elementary school counselor 5 years ago. See, after I had crashed into that tree at 18 years old, I had spent every single day waking up and learning everything that I could about psychology, philosophy, social science, the history of pedagogy, school policy, neurobiology, organizational behavior. And I had learned quite a bit. And what I noticed after learning all of that through undergrad and graduate school and stepping foot into a school, the teachers in that school did not have this same awareness. The teachers in this school did not have training in psychology and social science. They were experts of pedagogy, but they were not experts of neuroscience, psychology, or social science. The teachers at this school did not understand neuroception, that it did not matter how much you rewarded a child or punished a child. It did not matter how articulately you expressed your expectations for a classroom community. That if a child's nervous system does not feel safe, they will be unable to learn. If a child's nervous system does not feel safe, they will be unable to regulate their behavior in helpful ways. And so instead, since these teachers did not understand this, intentional shaming of students was something that was used as a primary behavior management strategy in most classrooms. And that's what I still see in most classrooms that I have stepped into in the last year, because our teachers don't have this training. So at the school I was at, we developed a plan. We looked at the 4 R's of education: reading, writing, arithmetic, and relationship, and we created 2 blueprints, which I spearheaded. One blueprint is for how do we teach teachers individual skills rooted in modern neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral science so that they can increase their personal emotional regulation skills, so that when they become emotionally triggered, they don't discharge and displace that emotion by then shaming or scaring or shouting at children. Instead, they're able to regulate their own emotions, and they're able to understand how such actions would be harmful and choose to show up in a different way, because they would have greater understanding about how to respond to children's behavioral challenge based on each child's brain and body, based on the science. And how do we shift things systemically? How do we create a plan for introducing and exploring modern social psychology, organizational psychology, behavioral economics, and neuroscience for transforming organizational culture, systems, and practices in order to promote trait mindfulness? This is the framework I created. I don't have a citation for you yet because it's still in press. It has 6 components. You'll see at the top is mindfulness, because like my story, you can't connect with others if you can't connect with yourself, because my ability to regulate my behavior within a relationship, whether that relationship is a classroom community or that relationship is a teacher and a student, my ability to regulate my behavior is rooted in how I respond to my internal experience. I need to be able to have some awareness of my internal experience before I can then learn to respond to my internal experience differently. You'll also see there at the bottom is shared vision. In order for us to work together as a community, we need to make sure that we're all walking towards the same direction. In order for a vision to truly be shared, there needs to be legitimate collaborative ownership. And to do this, the thing that most school leaders miss is that in order to create a culture of candor and collaboration, we have to shift power structures, which means we need cross-hierarchical feedback, meaning employees need to feel empowered to be allowed to share feedback with those who have more power than them. And that is entirely rooted in how leaders make themselves open to feedback. The key to shifting an organizational culture is trust, creating a trusting container that allows for vulnerability, meaning the leaders open themselves up to the vulnerability of receiving genuine feedback, the honesty that they need in order to have all of the accurate information for actually transforming systems, so that people aren't just saying what they think their boss wants to say. We'll get into some of these other pieces as we start going through the transformation process. In order to implement this blueprint, we began by creating a trusting container. And in order to do that, you first have to ask the right questions to the right people. So we created survey tools, anonymous surveys that we sent out to staff, and I went to every single staff member and I interviewed them. And I asked them questions about how they felt about the culture, about their beliefs, about accountability and behavior management. Then we created the container. We brought that data to the leadership team. We had honest conversations about what we should do. How do we shift this culture? We identified that it was a challenge. Then we explored information, beliefs, values. We clarified our mission, our vision, our values, and then we began to set goals and create new systems. We created the container of trust by focusing on how do we establish safety of the nervous systems of all the adults in this space? How do we truly promote shared vulnerability, and how do we clarify what our purpose is here? And then we led folks through a professional development timeline. That first year, in August, I trained each staff member on the difference between shame and guilt, and how shame suppresses and is inversely correlated with long-term behavior change, but is positively correlated with suicide, depression, anxiety, addiction. We're talking about the role of the counselor. We had conversations about what VTSS is. I introduced mindfulness and how to cultivate the state of mindfulness to teachers and empowering them with tools for their own life for building up their emotional regulation skills, and then introducing to their students. We sent out surveys, interviewed staff, created parent book clubs so that other stakeholders were also getting this information and asking these questions, developing their relationship skills. We taught our staff about trauma and adverse childhood experiences so that they could begin to open up to the idea that we need to understand more what kids' needs are and address lagging skills that they have based on their neurobiology, which has been written by their experiences, so that they then could open up to the idea that every single child needs to be responded to based on their needs. That if they are showing up in a way that is unhelpful, that is hurtful, it is because it is a maladaptive attempt to regulate an emotion, that they have needs that also aren't being met. So how do we shift away from a retribution or shame-based behavior management process that looks at misbehavior as being something that a child wants to do because they haven't been coerced appropriately, or because expectations just haven't been communicated articulately enough? In order to do that, we also introduced staff to restorative circles and polyvagal theory and the science of trust and attachment. In the second year, we got deeper into this. We introduced staff to emotional first aid so that they could feel empowered to respond to a child in crisis, so they could understand just the basics of helping a child regulate their nervous system, such as breathing. So they could understand how shouting at a child who has become dysregulated only makes the problem worse. We dove into motivation, understanding how helping a child clarify what matters to them and connecting that to the classroom is really the key to motivation. We explored values-driven teacher wellness so that our teachers could have more tools for relating with their inner world. We defined our values because in order for me to regulate my attention, I have to have the skill of being able to prioritize what matters most to me. Otherwise, everything could be an engaging stimuli for me to direct my attention at. So values clarification is the key to strengthening attention practices and being able to regulate emotion. We explored what empathy is. We had our whole staff then review the values that our leadership team had been working on for 6 months and did a start, stop, continue for behaviors. What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we continue doing that serve these values? In year 3, we continued to get more specific about what these values looked like. We had more professional development on shame and the true science of behavior change. We introduced mindfulness even more.
Matt, I'm sorry to interrupt, but it is 2:30 and we need to have enough time for the last speaker.
Sure.
If you could, yes, quickly wrap up because the next session has to start.
I've got you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So my point here is that teaching mindfulness is the key for transforming our school cultures to be able to truly meet our children's needs. And to do that, we don't even have to teach children about meditation. What we do need to do is think about our systems and find ways to root them in the modern science of neurobiology so that we can have regulated nervous systems that allow people to connect with their experience, which then allows them to connect with new learning experiences and to connect with others. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was a great presentation. Last but not least, we will have our talk on providing effective student supports, making MTSS work in middle school. Our speakers are Mike Littleton and Ronald Wallace. Mike is an assistant principal at Toano Middle School, and Ronald is the MTSS coach, also at Toano Middle School, which is part of the Williamsburg James City County Public School System. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Hannah. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone being here today. So we've heard a lot about the need for all of these mental supports, especially just in general, but especially over the last, as Matt put it, the last 20 months, because of course we've gone through a lot. And so today, Ronald and I are here to share a little bit about what we've done at Toano Middle School, but also hopefully to hear from some other folks about what you all do, because we are all in this together trying to figure out how to meet these needs for all of our students. I'll tell you a little bit about our background. I started as an 8th grade English teacher. I have a real passion that every student can learn in a fully inclusive environment. My background in education started working in a school division where all students were in a fully inclusive environment. And so I'm very passionate that every student can learn. This is my 8th year as a middle school assistant principal and my 3rd year at TMS.
Hey, and my name is Ron Wallace. I'm a 5th year teacher at TMS, and it's also my 5th year teaching. This is my 1st year as MTSS coach. And my belief is that, physical health isn't the only thing that matters. I think that we need to empower our students by teaching them the skills to make healthy decisions so they can lead long and healthy lives holistically.
So again, the big thing that we're here today is just to share some of what we've done. A lot of times I go to these conferences and I get a lot of great information, but I don't know how to apply it. So our goal today is to really just share with you our story and what we've done so far and how we continue to grow our program at our school. If you're not familiar, MTSS stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports. Every school division in Virginia works with MTSS. Some call it VTSS. Some call it MTSS. It's all the same thing. It's just a different name. But it is that protocol that is already in place that most school divisions have been using for a while to provide these supports. So how can we adapt this as we go to meet the needs of our students, especially after the challenges we've had the last couple of years? But Ronald's going to tell you a little bit of background about what MTSS is.
Yeah, so MTSS is broken up into 3 tiers for both academic and behavioral supports and observation. And we collect data on this in order to figure out where students are in this tier system. So tier 1 is going to be the majority of students. So this is your general population. And here we're just teaching students what our expectations are for them to create a good culture at the school, and of course, to promote a good learning environment. And then tier 2 is more of a targeted intervention. So these are the kids that show up on our radar. These are the students that we're usually going to talk about in our student support meetings. And that slide's going to come up a little bit later. But these are kids who, could have some academic problems or behavioral problems, but minimal intervention is involved. And then tier 3 is going to be our more intensive intervention. And these kids are fairly easily identifiable, but not in all cases. So we're looking to provide supports for all of our students and in an individualized fashion if we can, or if it's needed.
So to break it down, there's 2 different parts. There's the academic side of MTSS. So again, your tier 1's that core class instruction. Tier 2 is more targeted. Tier 3 is that intense individualized instruction that you would provide as a teacher. And then our behavioral. And the way that I usually explain it to teachers is that tier 1 means that consequences for a student usually work the first time. Tier 2, consequences only work when you find the function of that behavior and may have to provide some additional support. And tier 3, proactive plans only. Consequences do not work. You really have to come up with something that is individualized for that student. It takes a lot of data collection. It takes a lot of hard work and collaboration with all of the staff to make sure that we're doing everything we can to see some progress with our students that are in that tier.
So our hope for you today is really just sharing what we do, and we'll really try to relay this information to you to bring some clarity to what we do in hopes that you can set goals and expectations for MTSS at your school for whatever your situation is. So we'll start off with tier 1, the general routines and procedures. So how these routines and procedures are implemented in the classroom, the bus, settings you probably wouldn't normally think of. And then tier 2 and tier 3, we'll discuss our student support team meetings, the way those are run, and then how we collect data on these students. And really, we want this to be as practical as possible. So what we're sharing with you, I think, is really easily modifiable, and it's something that we want to sustain you for the months and years to come.
So to start with, we try to set goals every year about our progress, and we try to make goals that are definitely attainable. We've been doing this for 6 years now, and every year we just have a little bit more that we go through. And sometimes we meet our goals and we come back at the end of the year, we reevaluate how we're doing, but we're always kind of looking forward. When we were moving from 2019 to 2020, we had some very high goals, but of course, everything changed. And so as you see right here, when we're looking at 2020, our real goal was how can we adjust things to meet the needs of students in virtual instruction? How can we implement professional development in areas of social emotional learning for our students? Everything changed, but that's a big part of how MTSS is great. It's very adaptable. It is based on the specific needs of the school. So this year, we have 4 goals that we're working on. The first one, we're just calling MTSS Reboot. We want to get back to the basics, talking about how we teach, what we teach, implementing everything that we've done in the past, but making sure that all of our teachers are familiar with how these things work. We really are focusing hard on the social emotional learning of our staff, because teachers, I've been hearing a lot about it all day throughout the conference. Burnout is a huge thing that teachers are really dealing with, and we're only less than a quarter of the year through the school year. Student SEL, how are we providing social emotional learning techniques for our students? And one of the ways we do that is through our morning jumpstart program that we've developed at our school, and we'll tell you a little bit about that. And then we just try to recognize everything that we're doing great. And that's the one thing that I think is lacking in a lot of schools I've worked in the past, is we're all doing all these great things, but we get so busy, sometimes we forget to recognize those things. So we've made a conscious effort to make that one of our goals for this school year.
So this is our acronym, our PRIDE acronym that we put onto something called a PRIDE matrix. But the acronym is really just something simple that the students can remember: Tiger, Pride. And along, I guess, Mike, you can advance to the next slide. We put the PRIDE matrix, we put the PRIDE acronym on the PRIDE matrix essentially to show the students what pride looks like in different settings, because obviously there are different expectations in different places. The hallway, the way you conduct yourself in the hallway won't look like the way you conduct yourself in the classroom. Same thing with the buses. And this is also placed on the back of one of our intervention forms. It's called a reflection form. So the students go back to this and reference it whenever they have some sort of misconduct or they're having an issue in class. It gives the student an opportunity to evaluate their own behaviors and just figure out a better decision-making process for the next time. So we're constantly conferencing with students about the PRIDE matrix and encouraging them to follow it in multiple settings. So along with the bus driver, in the gymnasium where I teach, because I know that looks different, and of course in the traditional classroom. So there's a different look at the PRIDE matrix, because in 2020 and going into 2021, we were exclusively virtual. So with that said, we had to teach the kids okay, this is what the virtual classroom is going to look like. And we had to give them netiquette procedures, like what's appropriate to do on a Zoom call, what is not appropriate, what website should we be visiting, you know, and really managing them that way. So we had to modify the Pride Matrix, but still, I think it kept its core values as far as the acronym is concerned. And then a little bit later in 2021, the second half of the school year, we had students return back to the building. And this looked very different, and I'm sure you all can relate. Certain students, like our sixth graders, had never been in the building at all. So being able to relay this information to them so they're able to digest it and apply it was a little bit of a challenge. But once again, we were able to modify Tiger Pride so it worked. And then I think this year with our MTSS reboot in person, I think it's really working out and paying off, us continuing to implement this through the pandemic.
And so if Tiger Pride is how we kind of get our tier 1 and our routines and our procedures, tier 2 and 3 is how we meet the needs of all of the students that don't fall into that tier 1. How do we meet the needs of every kids? Our school has 600 kids. In a school with 3,000 kids, you know, you really have to have an amazing system to make sure that you're trying to do these things. And I think what we've done can apply to any school, any size school, any school with any kind of demographic. Our school is really unique because Williamsburg is very much a mix of lots of different things. We border Newport News on one end, but then here we border New Kent on the other end. And so we have a mix of rural, a little bit of everything. We have a large population of students who are military children, and what we do kind of meets the needs of all of our students. And we feel like this program can meet the needs really at any school based on what we've tried to do. So with our advanced tiers, we really set it up into 5 different things: identification, who needs the help; collaboration, how we can work together to meet the needs of these students; creating plans, monitoring those plans, and evaluating and reflecting. It's overwhelming when you look at the amount of students that this has to kind of help, but with a good system, it works. So what we've come up with are what we call student support meetings and the advanced tiers data wall. So what you see here is kind of just a little snippet of what our advanced tiers data wall looks like. Last year, the way we developed this is that we met weekly with all staff members, 15 to 20 minutes per grade level through Zoom. Throughout the year, 183 students were referred to our advanced tiers. We made communication with all of these families in a variety of different ways, depending on the needs of the students. Action plans were created for over 103 of these students. The other 80, it wasn't necessary that they necessarily needed a real action plan, but this was a way for us to identify and come up with plans for all of those students. This year, we're continuing to adjust, and I think that's the key to all this, is to try to adapt to the needs of what you're doing. So this year, we meet bi-weekly with all staff, 45 minutes every 2 weeks in grade level teams. And here we are, we've already had 41 students that have been referred to our program so far this year.
So these are just some snapshots of what our SST teams look like. And I'm over there on the left side, the left picture, that upper left-hand corner. And I'm putting in things into our advanced data wall spreadsheet. And then Brandy, one of our counselors, who's awesome, she's facilitating the discussion. So in this room, this is the 6th grade combined with the related arts. So we have, 2 people who teach health and PE, myself and my colleague, and then we have all of these people from other disciplines. I think it really gives us the chance to share our experience with certain students in certain classrooms. So that's our opportunity to say, hey, look, I have a relationship with this kid. This intervention seems to work, or this relationship seems to work. Maybe you want to talk to them about this. So I just think these are excellent opportunities to get people from different parts of the building to share their experience and come up with intervention plans and document them.
Those are all the ways that we provide supports for students who are challenging and having a hard time with whatever it may be. But we also want to recognize all of our students who are doing a really good job. So again, we change this up as much as we can because we work in middle school. We have to do things that are relevant and exciting and interesting to students. So what we've come up with this year is, if you've never heard of being rickrolled. You probably should Google that if you work with middle school kids, because they know about it. They know what it is. But we're calling it Tiger Roll because we're the Toano Tigers. And so at our student support meetings that Ronald was just talking about, we also recognize students that are doing well. And so then once a week, we go around to classrooms, we get the music going, the Rick Astley, and we recognize those students. We give them a little coupon from the picture that you see here, and they come to the office. They get to pick out a prize. Just this past week, Ronald was able to work with our central office to get a ton of rewards for our students through another one of our organizations in the division that we're partnering with. And I think that's the key to all of this is it's collaboration. It's if you don't ask, if you don't try, then you can't come up with things that are really going to meet the needs of students. And right now, people want to help. People want to do things to help our kids. So we're always trying to bring new things to keep things relevant and also to keep things positive and moving students in the right direction. So again, our advanced tiers, what we do, identify. We do that at our advanced tiers meetings, our student support meetings. We collaborate and we talk as grade levels. School administration also, we go back to that advanced tiers data wall daily and look at it and update it when we contact families, when we meet with students. We do grade checks, we do conferencing, we do parent Zoom meetings to try to get those kids up to task. I did a home visit this morning in between sessions today. We do everything we can from that advanced tiers data wall is how we kind of organize all of that. And then we monitor student progress. And then at all times, we're evaluating not just how our students are doing, but how our program is doing and trying to adjust it to meet the needs of our school. So how can you make this happen at your school? First is to get buy-in, okay? Trying to make connections, talking to people about how to start things, setting goals for what you want to do, having really high expectations. Our goal is that every single student at our school will be successful. We are going to be the best. We're going to have the best grades and the best everything. And so if we always have those high expectations, our students are going to work to meet them. And then we always do what's in the best interest of our students. And a lot of times that means being really creative with what we're trying to do. All of the different tools that we use, we're going to share with you today. So Ronald in just a second is going to post a link to a Google folder that you can access all of our materials, today's PowerPoint, what our Pride Matrix looks like, a blank advanced tiers data wall. We use what we call a request for assistance form as well, because some teachers teach across grade levels, can't come to all those meetings. So if they want to fill out a form to ask for help, they can do that. We have tons of interventions that we work to provide, and we have lots of lists and things that we do, everything from check-in, check-out to you name it. I mean, we're always coming up with new things, and that's one of the reasons we're here today is to share with you. So if you have ideas and you connect with us, you can tell us more about what you do. And also ways that we identify students, like the Forced Choice Reinforcement Survey and how we identify the supports that are needed for students. Again, we really appreciate everyone being here today and listening to and sharing what we do here at Toano Middle School. And again, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. And we would love to share with you and connect a little bit more about what we do.
Thank you so much for your presentations, and thank you to all our speakers today. My apologies, we've run out of time for question and answers. I have failed you all as a moderator, but our wonderful presenters have shared their contact information, and I know I'm speaking for them, but I'm pretty sure that they'll be okay with you contacting them and emailing them directly if you have additional information or would like to follow up with them. So thank you all for your wonderful talks. It was very informative. And thank you all to the participants for joining us this afternoon. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks. I appreciate it. You'll have a good one.
Great to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you too.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Real quick, the social worker in me cheered when I heard you say you made a home visit.
Yeah, it's nice. We have some areas that are like literally right across the street. So yeah, this morning I had to go see someone in between sessions. I'm at my school, as you can tell in the background. So
Yeah.
all right.
Well,
Y'all have a great afternoon. Nice to meet you all.
All right.
Bye.